This is your host, Dr. James Reaney, and I have some good news for you. We have broken free of the Earth's gravitational pull, which means you can now safely unfasten your seatbelts. Having broken free of the Earth's gravitational pull, we are now primed to travel into the deeper recesses of inner space. Before we go to warp speed, let's look back momentarily to part 3, where we explored spirituality, the third dimension of consciousness. The main idea revealed on that leg of our journey was that whether life is seen as meaningful or meaningless depends in large part on how we reconcile the opposing forces of pain and pleasure, life and death. To reconcile these opposing forces in a meaningful way, you must develop a connection to something greater than ego consciousness, the unconscious. Faith in the unconscious empowers, and the unconscious empowers faith, especially if this faith is used to develop a positive myth about your life's purpose. Unfortunately, today it has become harder than ever to have faith, as faith pales next to the awesome specter of science and technology. Through advances in science and technology, we have gained comfort and convenience, but in the process lost much of our mystical participation with nature. Likewise, we have become more ego-invested and less connected to self and others. This trade-off of inner development for technological ascendance produces a disconnect between ego consciousness and self-awareness that fosters emptiness. This emptiness ensues because the ego becomes so focused on the things of the outer world that it overrides the needs of the inner world with its needs and requirements. As hard as it may be for the ego to accept, the ego needs the self. Without the self to temper and restore consciousness, the ego sooner or later reaches a stalemate that unfortunately is cultivated by popular culture. As such, many people misinterpret the needs of the inner world as a need for sports cars and self-indulgences. To effectively deal with the inner world, the ego needs to shift its center of gravity from the things of the outer world to the higher needs of the self and the inner core. This the ego can only do by developing an increased motivation for self-development, a willingness to work hard on it, and by breaking free of limiting beliefs. To the ego, this may seem like a lot to ask, but it's really not, because satisfying the need for higher levels of self-awareness at a certain point becomes very satisfying. Striving for higher levels of self-awareness gives one a perspective that can transform every experience into something of substance. So let's say you have the needed motivation for self-development and the willingness to work hard on it. You will still have to break free of your limiting beliefs. This is exceptionally hard to do because limiting beliefs are hard to recognize, let alone change. Breaking free of limiting beliefs becomes even more difficult today because our culture cultivates many beliefs that run contrary to self-development. This has the net effect of diverting you from the riches of the inner world. So whether you realize it or not, you are going to have difficulty breaking free of limiting beliefs. My concern, however, is not so much the difficulty, but more so the misuse of information and the power it contains by those who have the ability to misuse it. Stop and think about it. If sponsors are willing to pay millions of dollars for seconds of advertising during the Super Bowl, they must know something we don't about their ability to manipulate our minds. Just think of how many hours the average person spends watching television, listening to the radio, on the internet, or reading billboards, magazines, and newspapers, and you can begin to appreciate how commanding the overall effect must be on the mind and its belief systems. The gravitational force of these technologies is becoming more powerful than the self's ability to be self-directing. Most advertisers do not care if their programming, which is geared to appeal to your dominant drive for excitement, turns you into a partial being ravaged by limited beliefs that foster doubt and loneliness. In fact, they spend millions researching ways to take advantage of your doubts and loneliness. The goal is to get your ego overly invested in their products and programs as they promise excitement and security. By creating a chronic need for stimulation and excitement that fixates psychic energy on the superficial and meaningless, they block or distort self-development. Consciousness distracted by the thrills does not realize, of course, that it is becoming more and more invested in the superficial and the meaningless. What I've been telling you here may sound negative, but it's for a good cause, to identify a major threat to your self-development and to offer a solution. You see, consciousness and the psychic energy it produces should be expressed in three ways: as instinct, as ego consciousness, and as an investment in the self. For some strange reason, however, we are predisposed to put our psychic energy under the control of the ego. This is what makes us vulnerable. Advertisers know this and use it for their profit. Letting Destiny Deliver knows this too, but instead of exploiting it, wants to teach you how to use all three forms of psychic energy for self-health. This prescription for self-health in its entirety provides you with the understandings and guidelines you need to make that important shift from self-sabotage to self-health. I'm not here to make false promises or to give you false hope, because there is pain on the path to self-health, just as there is pain in self-sabotage. At least the pain that comes out of self-development is empowering, whereas pain from self-sabotage leads to emptiness and despair. In the hope of giving anyone that wants it a means to achieve self-health, I have formulated the 10 pathways. These pathways, if followed, will allow you to begin taking charge of your mind, body, and spirit. The 10 pathways are the yellow brick road that lead to self-health. These pathways will give you clear and effective ways of reclaiming your destiny. Like Dorothy, who had to deal with various challenges on her journey on the yellow brick road, you too will have to deal with the benevolent and destructive forces encountered on your journey. So make sure you have AAA. In this case, the 3 A's stand for awareness, avoidance, and action. Awareness, avoidance, and action serve as the important traffic light to guide you down the pathways. Awareness, the yellow light, allows you to distinguish the benevolent from the destructive and decide whether you should take action or avoid. By following the first 3 pathways, you will increase awareness and therefore be able to make better decisions. Avoidance, the red light, is the second A and is important because it instructs you on what not to do. There are 3 pathways under this heading. The third A, action, is the green light, and it is significant because it benefits you to act in these particular ways. The 4 pathways under this heading, like the other 6, are fundamental to the health and well-being of the self-health system. First, I will outline the 10 pathways, then I will go into greater detail about them. The first pathway under the heading of awareness is achieving an awareness of self that is able to overcome distortions or blockages to self-development created by misinformation and oppression. The next pathway under the heading of awareness involves achieving an awareness of conscious and unconscious mind that improves the flow of information from one brain to the other. Also under the heading of awareness is the need to achieve an awareness of purpose and meaning that put pain and pleasure, life and death, into a spiritual context. This is a spiritual awareness that includes a faith in the unconscious that allows you to comfortably let go of ego consciousness when necessary. The next 3 pathways fall under the red light of avoidance, and they ask you to 1. Avoid being too passive about acquiring and processing information. The more passive you are, the more you risk losing your self-health. 2. Avoid self-sabotage and do not deny, disown, or repress those parts of yourself seeking expression. Instead, find a safe place and a safe way to give them a voice. 3. Avoid mindsets and limiting beliefs that keep you mired down in the same old, or which distort perception. The final 4 pathways under action say you need to 1. Act again and again on newly realized positive potentials so they can become an integrated part of your actions. 2. Act in ways that give and earn love and respect so the ego can maintain a healthy balance between the inner and outer world. 3, act in ways that counteract self-doubt so it doesn't turn into self-sabotage. And finally, act in ways that validate your lifelong commitment to balancing the opposing forces of conscious and unconscious mind, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, pain and pleasure, life and death. Now let's explore the 10 pathways in greater detail. The first pathway under the yellow light of awareness, as I said before, involves achieving an awareness of self that is resilient to the distortions or blockages in self-development caused by oppression, manipulation, and misinformation. In order to do this, you must recognize that you have both a good side and a bad side. This good and bad side creates within you a certain rhythm that must be kept in balance. Therefore, it is better to see your dark side and work with it than to fear it, avoid it, or deny it. You need an awareness of both so you can truly distinguish what you want from what you don't. If you deny the dark side of your needs because they are seen as wrong, you will undermine your decision-making process. Distorting, denying, or repressing blocks the flow of information from the self into consciousness. We all have the potential to be loving, respectful, understanding, and self-developing because they are instinctual. However, we also have the potential to be hateful, disrespectful, unable to understand, and self-defeating. These, after all, are the opposing forces. Just as a plant needs both light and darkness to grow, so do you. So don't suffer from the limited thinking that has you believing that you are any different. By having a dualistic sense of self, you not only improve decision-making, you also develop immunity to certain limiting beliefs. This is because having a dualistic sense of self puts you in a better position to see and understand the destructive forces that exist in the self or that distort or block self-development. This is important because destructive forces such as toxic thinking, weakness, and misinformation are the tartar and plaque that weakens the mind and causes thought decay. The second pathway under awareness asks that you develop an awareness of both conscious and unconscious thinking potentials. By understanding how each mind thinks, you can take advantage of both. An awareness of conscious and unconscious thinking potentials also makes it easier to have a balanced relationship between the ego and the self. This is a relationship where the conscious mind doesn't undo what the unconscious mind can do. A relationship where the conscious mind can make use of the unconscious mind's many competencies and understandings. The relationship between the conscious and unconscious mind is the most important relationship because it forms the nucleus of all psychic life. This will become more obvious as we progress further into the prescription. The third pathway to self-health under awareness involves developing a spiritual awareness that gives meaning and purpose to your life. Your life must have an awareness of purpose that can meaningfully and respectfully reconcile opposing forces. Since pain and pleasure and life and death are realities that must be reckoned with, you must have some sense of purpose that keeps them from turning you into a negative, bitter, or selfish person. For the able person, no material is unproductive. He or she can find use for everything. Spiritual awareness includes developing a personal myth that helps you interpret the events of your life as somehow connecting you to a higher purpose. If your myth is in tune with your potential, you will fulfill your destiny. You see, there is in us a fate that lends power to life. Assigning the right place to life and fate puts the two in harmony. Being in tune with your destiny allows your inner nature to remain stronger and richer than anything offered by external fortune. Not because it makes you superior or perfect, but because it allows you to achieve a discipline that is awakened by enthusiasm rather than by force or temptation. Actor Michael Landon as a teenager was watching a movie about Samson when he made a connection that would affect him for the rest of his life. The connection came to be because Michael Landon's father's name was Sam, and since he was his son, that made him Sam's son. Out of this, Michael Landon developed his myth. His fantasy led him to grow his hair long, believing that he gained his strength from his hair. Michael Landon kept his hair long because he believed it empowered him, and because of this he was empowered. This belief allowed him to discover potentials in the unconscious he might not have had access to otherwise. Long hair and its connection to Samson served to not only increase his physical strength, but also his spiritual strength. His identification with Samson created a myth that served to give his life meaning and purpose. In this case, his belief about being Samson was empowering, not limiting. His personal myth influenced how he perceived himself and his place in the world. Had he never seen the movie, he might never have formed this myth. He used his myth, acting and directing as a way to fulfill a life where he championed for those higher values of love, respect, caring, and acceptance. Creating a myth about the meaningfulness of life and your role in it is very helpful in dealing with the duality of good and bad in the self. Having a spiritual purpose drives us to take the bad and somehow channel it for good. The fourth pathway, which falls under the next heading of avoidance, is avoiding being passive in acquiring and processing information. Watching TV is a passive way of acquiring and processing information because it does all the work for you. The more passive you are about acquiring information, the more random you make the process, as you are no longer selecting the information or how it is interpreted. The reason for being active is obvious: to regain the control you should have over the information you consume. The information and images you take in greatly impacts your thinking, your belief systems, and your individuality. You need to take responsibility for your happiness by acquiring and processing the information that most effectively nurtures self-development and self-knowledge. In this case, self-knowledge does not mean a preoccupation with your own thoughts, but rather a concern about the effects you create. This is something that needs to be taken seriously if you want to protect yourself from the many illusions and exploitations of misinformation and misfortune. Most of the information on public airwaves is intended for mass consumption or to get something from you. It is usually designed to appeal to your passionate drives, but often at the expense of the life forces and self-health. If you wait too long to take charge of the information that drives you, or to preserve your individuality, your life will no longer be your own. The fifth pathway, which is the second pathway under avoidance, is to avoid denying, disowning, or repressing important parts of the self. Just as a glove forms a barrier between hand and object, self-deception forms a barrier between truth and illusion. And just as a glove alters the sensation of the object being touched, self-deception alters one's sense of self and others. When we deny or distort who we are, we lose our sense of objectivity about self and others. When we deny things, they do not disappear. They merely withdraw into the unconscious, where they take on a life of their own. Denying parts of the self at a conscious level and sweeping them under the rug may seem safe enough, but the cost winds up being great. Denied or disowned material has a greater chance of leading to self-sabotage than if the conscious mind were to deal with it. By denying and disowning, we become like the split-brain patients who were out of touch with their non-talking brain. Even though they were not conscious of the information in their mute right brain, it still influenced their thinking, feelings, and actions in ways the ego didn't realize. The next pathway, which is the third pathway under avoidance, is avoiding mindsets and limited beliefs that create blind spots. Based on experience as well as the lack thereof, we develop our beliefs. These beliefs, if limiting, will lead to selective awareness and prevent you from seeing things that are in fact there. Beliefs are so powerful that they can also make you see things that are not there. To keep this from happening, you need to challenge your beliefs and your resistance to other ways of thinking and seeing. Limited beliefs and the mindsets they produce reduce the awareness of alternatives, while at the same time increasing the awareness of sameness. The seventh pathway, which is the first pathway under the heading of action, involves the use of repetition so you can take information to higher levels. Repetition is irreplaceable in this regard. Children instinctively know this. That is why they are so repetitious. Repetition is important because it promotes the integration and reintegration of information. As information becomes integrated and reintegrated, it transforms. Since we all have the potential for good and bad, we need to be mindful of what we do repetitiously. Repetition needs to promote the transformation of potential, otherwise it just represents sameness or stuckness. To prevent repetition from deteriorating into sameness or stuckness, you will need to take risks and act accordingly so you can keep growing. If repetition is not leading to the acquisition of new potentials and understandings, then you are stuck or blocked. The eighth pathway, or the second pathway under action, is acting responsibly when it comes to self-doubt. Doubt inhibits the unconscious and makes it less available to the conscious mind. Self-doubt interferes with the ability of both minds to be at their best. The best antidote for self-doubt is self-knowledge. With self-knowledge, you become more objective about your own strengths and weaknesses, and therefore resistant to the doubts imposed by the ego and others. Self-knowledge is necessary in order to have confidence and trust in the self. If you truly have self-knowledge, you know that no matter who you are, you possess positive potential and purpose. To know this and make use of it is sure to make doubt recede. Understanding how the unconscious works and trusting its ability to work for you can also help you deal with doubt. By having faith in the unconscious, you can let go of conscious effort and doubt and take advantage of unconscious competence. To take advantage of your unconscious, you need to know how to let go consciously. Do you know how to let go? How to let go consciously? It's not easy to do, yet you need to let go consciously. The conscious mind can really focus. We want it to do so much. Let go consciously. How will you know when you've let go consciously? Because you'll let go of the need to know consciously. You won't need to know and you won't forget, even though you let go consciously. Instead, it's set free to be worked on unconsciously. So let go consciously. The ninth pathway, which is the third pathway under the heading of action, is acting in ways that give and earn love and respect. We need to give and receive love and respect because they are instinctual and therefore a basic requirement for self-help. Love and respect nurtures and activates our higher human potential. Love and respect promotes spontaneity, creativity, and the freedom of expression. If we have love and respect, we are free to be ourselves. Christopher Reeve, when he first discovered that he was paralyzed, wanted to die. However, the realization that his wife and children still loved him instantly made him want to live. The love empowered him to deal with the loss of his body and also inspired him to invest in new purpose and meaning as he became an advocate for research into a cure for spinal cord injuries. The 10th and final pathway under action is acting in a way that maintains your commitment to the lifelong practice of balancing the opposing forces of mind, body, and spirit, or of conscious and unconscious mind, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system activity, and pain and pleasure, life and death. It's like exercise. The best benefit from it, you need to do it regularly and for the rest of your life. If these opposing forces of mind, body, and spirit are not balanced, they can produce inner conflict. Conflict within can weaken the power to conquer danger without. So don't stop using the pathways. Most important of all, don't risk moving into a state of entropy or deterioration. The 10 pathways are like the 10 commandments. If followed, they will enrich your life by ensuring higher levels of self-health and more profound happiness. The 10 pathways are important because they offer an alternative to the mundane and the madness of everyday life and put you back in charge. They do so by allowing you to know and use the self-health system of mind, body, and spirit in a holistic and practical manner rather than making you dependent on escapes that don't work or meaningless distractions that leave you empty and hungry. This brings us to the conclusion of Part 4. Part 5 will give you an in-depth appreciation of ego consciousness as compared to self-awareness. This will help you better understand the difference between the two.